I've been a long-haul trucker for about 15 years now. There's a lot I've seen out there on the road, things I can explain and things I can't. This story falls into the latter category. It happened in 2019, somewhere in the vast emptiness of the Nevada desert. I was hauling furniture from California to Utah, pushing through an overnight drive with nothing but the dull hum of the engine and the faint glow of the dashboard for company. It was one of those stretches where the world felt abandoned. No other vehicles, no distant city lights, just an unbroken expanse of highway disappearing into darkness. My headlights were weaker than they should have been, something I had meant to fix weeks ago, but hadn't. I was debating whether to pull over and wait for dawn when I saw it. Red taillights glowing faintly in the distance. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't just a car on the side of the road. It was parked dead center on the double yellow lines, hazards flashing. I slowed to a crawl, my stomach tightening. The car was a silver sedan, passenger door wide open, engine off. No movement inside. Now, I'm not the kind of guy to spook easily. I've been in bar fights, dealt with road rage lunatics, even pulled a drunk guy out of a ditch once. But something about this felt wrong. Still, I figured someone might need help. Maybe a breakdown, or some poor bastard had wandered off looking for a signal. I eased my truck onto the shoulder, killed the engine, and grabbed my flashlight. Stepping out, the silence hit me like a wall. The desert at night has a kind of emptiness that's hard to describe. No wind, no animals, just an oppressive, absolute stillness. The only sound was the slow, rhythmic click of the car's hazard lights. I shined my flashlight into the car. Empty. Not just missing a driver. There was nothing inside. No keys, no bags, no phone, no signs of anyone ever being there. The seats were pristine, untouched. My gut twisted. I glanced around, my breath fogging in the cold night air. That's when I noticed the footprints. A single set, leading away from the driver's side door, disappearing into the desert. Now, if you've ever been in the middle of nowhere at night, you'll understand why this chilled me. No sane person walks into the desert without a flashlight, without supplies, without so much as closing their car door. I debated getting back in my truck and leaving, but something held me there. A gnawing unease, a question that I needed answered. I followed the footprints. They led about 30 yards from the car before abruptly stopping. Just stopping. No return prints. No sign of someone collapsing. Just an abrupt, impossible end to the trail. That's when I felt it. A presence. Not a noise. Not a movement. Just this overwhelming sensation that I wasn't alone. That I was being watched. I swung my flashlight wildly, heart pounding. The beam illuminated only empty desert, endless and still. Then, from somewhere behind me, a low voice whispered, "Hey." I spun around so fast I nearly tripped. Nothing. Just the open car. Just the empty highway. Then, bang. A gunshot shattered the silence. I didn't see where it came from, but the bullet was close. Too close. I didn't think. I ran. I sprinted back to my truck, heart slamming against my ribs. As I scrambled into the cab, I caught a glimpse of something in my mirror, a shape standing by the abandoned car. A man, short, broad, wearing a dark jacket. His face was turned toward me, but I couldn't make out the details. What I did see was the shotgun in his hands. I threw my truck into gear and peeled out, gravel spitting under my tires. As I sped past, the man raised a hand. Not to shoot, not to threaten. He waved. A slow, deliberate wave, like he was saying goodbye. I didn't stop. I didn't breathe until I was miles down the road, until the red glow of the hazards was nothing but a distant memory. Only then did I realize something that made my blood turn to ice. That voice, the one that had whispered behind me, it wasn't the man with the shotgun. It had come from somewhere else. Somewhere much, much closer that I didn't stop driving for at least an hour. My hands were shaking, my throat dry, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. Who was that man? Why was the car empty? And whose voice had whispered behind me? The road ahead stretched out in an endless black ribbon. I knew I should call the police, but what would I even say? That I found an abandoned car, got shot at, and was haunted by some invisible presence? Yeah, that would go over well. I decided to get to the next truck stop, refuel, and calm myself down. Maybe grab a coffee, splash some cold water on my face. Anything to get the image of that waving man out of my head. But then I saw it. A pair of headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I told myself it was just another car. A coincidence. But as minutes passed, those lights didn't fade. They didn't turn. They didn't pass me. They stayed exactly the same distance behind me. I swallowed hard and pressed the gas, pushing my truck past the speed limit. The headlights matched my pace. I tried telling myself it wasn't the same car. It couldn't be. I'd been driving for over an hour. There was no way that guy had caught up to me. But my gut told me otherwise. The pit in my stomach deepened when the car turned off its headlights. Now, there was nothing in my mirrors. No glow. No sign of pursuit. Just the empty, pitch-black highway. But I knew better. Someone was still there. Following. Waiting. I gripped the wheel tighter, my breath coming in short, uneven gasps. My exit was still 10 miles away, and the thought of pulling over terrified me more than the idea of being tailed. And then my radio crackled. Static. A low hiss. I hadn't touched it. It had been silent for the entire drive. Then, beneath the static, a voice. Garbled, distant, like someone speaking from miles away. Hey, that same whisper. The one I'd heard back at the car. My foot slammed on the gas. I didn't care if I wrecked this truck. I just needed to get away. But as I did, my headlights caught something ahead. My breath stopped cold. A figure, standing in the middle of the road. My blood turned ice. It was the same man from before. The same short, broad-shouldered man with the shotgun. He wasn't waving this time. He was staring right at me, motionless, like he had been standing there the whole time, waiting. I yanked the wheel hard, narrowly missing him as I roared past. I caught the briefest glimpse of his face in my side mirror, expressionless, empty. Then, suddenly, those headlights behind me flicked back on. And in that same moment, my radio cleared. The static was gone. A voice, crystal clear this time, filled my cab. Not a whisper, not distorted. A woman's voice. Please, help me. My entire body broke out in chills. I didn't have time to think. I didn't have time to do anything. Because in my mirror, I saw something I couldn't explain. The car behind me, the one that had been tailing me, matching my speed, wasn't touching the road. It was floating. The tires hovered inches off the asphalt, the headlights flickering unnaturally, like a dying light bulb. And in the driver's seat, where the man should have been, there was nothing. Just an empty space. A void where a person should be. I don't remember how I made it to that truck stop. The next thing I knew, I was pulling into the parking lot, throwing the truck into park, and scrambling out, gasping for air. The road behind me was empty. No headlights. No floating car. No shotgun-wielding man. Just silence. I didn't sleep that night. I don't think I even blinked. The next morning, I asked around, trying to see if any other drivers had seen a lone car parked on the road, or a strange man waving in the dark. Nobody had. But one old-timer, a guy who had been driving these roads for decades, went pale when I described the car. He told me about a legend. Years ago, a woman had broken down on that stretch of highway. She called for help, but no one came. A trucker, maybe one like me, drove past without stopping. A few hours later, she was found murdered in the desert. Shot. And ever since, drivers have reported seeing an empty car in the middle of the road, a man with a gun, and hearing a woman's voice calling for help. I don't know if I believe in ghosts, but I never drive that stretch of road at night anymore. And sometimes, just sometimes, I still hear that voice on my radio. Please, help me. Story 2. There's a certain kind of loneliness that comes with being a trucker. You can go hours, sometimes whole nights, without seeing another living soul. The world shrinks down to the size of your cab, the endless highway, and the glow of the dashboard. I'd always thought I could handle it, but after what happened that night, I don't know if I'll ever feel safe on the road again. It was early March, still cold enough to see my breath when I exhaled. I had been driving nearly nonstop, making a long haul from Virginia to Iowa. The road was empty, the sky heavy with thick clouds, threatening a storm. My only company was the low hum of the radio, playing some old rock station that crackled every now and then with static. I was starting to nod off when I saw it, an old gas station up ahead, sitting just off the highway. I hadn't seen a sign for miles, hadn't even realized there was a stop anywhere nearby. But the lights were on, flickering neon, and I figured it was as good a place as any to grab some caffeine before I fell asleep at the wheel. The parking lot was cracked and worn, weeds pushing through the concrete. A single pickup truck sat near the entrance, rusted and covered in dust. The store's windows were dark except for the faint glow of a single light inside. I stepped out, stretching my legs. The air was unnervingly still. No wind, no sound. Just that eerie silence that makes your skin crawl. When I pushed open the door, the old bell above it jingled. The place was mostly empty. Rows of dusty shelves, a few snack items that looked like they had been sitting there for years. At the back, a small fridge hummed weakly. And then there was the cashier. An older man, maybe in his 60s, with thinning white hair and deep-set eyes. He was staring at me when I walked in, not moving, not blinking, like he had been waiting for something. I nodded at him and grabbed a bottle of soda from the fridge. When I set it down at the counter, he finally spoke. "You shouldn't be here." His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it in a long time. I let out a short laugh. "Yeah? Well, I just need something to keep me awake." The man didn't move. He didn't even ring up my drink. He just stared at me, his eyes dark and empty. "They don't like visitors." Something about the way he said it sent a chill up my spine. "Who doesn't?" I asked, half playing along, half waiting for him to just take my money so I could get the hell out of there. But he didn't answer. Instead, he turned his head slightly, looking past me, toward the front window. I followed his gaze, and that's when I saw them. 3 figures standing at the edge of the parking lot, just beyond the flickering reach of the neon lights. They weren't moving, just standing there, watching. I felt my stomach tighten. My grip on the bottle of soda went stiff. "Who are they?" The old man still didn't look at me. "You need to go? Now." A cold dread crept up my spine. I wasn't the type to scare easy, but something about those figures, the way they stood so perfectly still, set off every alarm in my body. I turned back to the door, my mind racing through a dozen possibilities. Maybe it was just some kids messing around. Maybe it was nothing. But when I looked again, they were closer. I sucked in a sharp breath. They hadn't walked, hadn't moved in any normal way. But somehow, they were now halfway across the lot, standing under the buzzing glow of the gas station sign. I could see them better now. They were tall, too tall. Their limbs were long, stretched unnaturally. Their heads tilted slightly, as if they were studying me. Their faces were wrong, just smooth, featureless skin where their eyes and mouth should have been. A low buzzing filled my ears, drowning out everything else. The room seemed to dim. The old man finally moved. He shoved my soda back toward me, his voice urgent now. "Go." I didn't argue. I turned and rushed toward the door, nearly tripping over my own feet. The figures were even closer now. They were right at the edge of the curb. I yanked open the truck door, threw myself inside, and locked it. My breathing was ragged, my pulse hammering in my ears. I slammed the key into the ignition, turned it. The truck wouldn't start. I twisted the key again. Nothing. Then, from the corner of my eye, one of them was right outside my window. Not moving, not making a sound, just standing there. Its head tilted to the side, its smooth, empty face pressed against the glass. Then, it raised its hand, and with one slow, deliberate motion, it knocked. The knock wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was just steady, rhythmic, like it was waiting for me to answer. I didn't. I sat frozen in my seat, my fingers locked around the ignition key, twisting it again and again. The engine wouldn't turn. The figure outside my window tilted its head further, pressing that smooth, featureless face closer to the glass. It was too tall. Its fingers, impossibly long, rested lightly against the door handle. I couldn't breathe. The other 2 figures were still near the curb, standing just under the flickering neon lights. But they weren't still anymore. They were moving, twitching. Their heads jerked sharply, like they were struggling to keep their balance. Their limbs bent in unnatural ways, their bodies shifting too fast, too erratically, like something that was pretending to be human but hadn't figured out how. The buzzing in my ears grew louder. I squeezed my eyes shut, my heart hammering in my chest. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. And then, the truck radio crackled to life. At first, just static. Then, beneath the static, a voice. A whisper. "Come out." I gasped. My fingers fumbled for the door lock, making sure it was still down, still locked. The whisper came again, clearer this time. "Come out. It's time to go." I turned my head slowly, my breath catching in my throat. The figure at my window was gone. But it wasn't over. A new sound filled the air. Footsteps. Something was climbing into the cab. I snapped my head around, toward the sleeper compartment behind me. The curtain moved. Just slightly. Just enough for me to see a shape pressing against it. I wanted to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. I could see the fabric stretching, bulging outward. Someone, was inside my truck. The engine was dead. My body was frozen. And then, the curtain peeled open, and I saw it. At first, I thought it was a person. A man. His skin was gray, his limbs too thin, his movements jerky, like a puppet being yanked by invisible strings. His face, oh God, his face. It wasn't featureless like the ones outside. It was stretched, his mouth pulled too wide, his eyes too far apart, like his skin had been taken from something else and forced onto a frame that didn't fit. He grinned at me, a grin that wasn't human. And then he spoke, not in a whisper, not in some guttural growl, in my own voice. "Come out," he said, lips curling around my words, mocking me. I reacted before I could think. I threw myself against the door, my elbows slamming into the handle. The lock popped up, the door swung open, and I fell. I hit the pavement hard, scraping my hands and knees. But I didn't stop. I scrambled to my feet, sprinting toward the gas station, toward the only source of light in the blackness. I reached the door, gripped the handle, pulled, locked. I pounded on the glass. "Let me in. Let me in." The old man inside didn't move. He just stared, expressionless, unblinking, like he had been expecting this. I spun back around, my lungs burning, my whole body trembling. The truck was empty. The door still hung open, my cab light flickering. The figures were gone. The parking lot was silent. I backed away, my chest rising and falling in ragged breaths. And then, the old man inside the store finally spoke. His lips moved, just barely. I couldn't hear him through the glass, but I knew what he said. I could read it. "They let you go." And then, without another word, he reached out and turned off the lights. The store went completely dark, and I was alone. I don't know how long I stood there. Eventually, I made it back to my truck. Somehow, it started on the first try. I drove. I didn't stop until I saw a real truck stop, miles down the road. When I told other drivers about the place, nobody had heard of it. There was no gas station along that stretch of highway. Nothing but abandoned road. I checked the map. I checked everything. It wasn't there. But I was. And I don't know who. Or what. Let me leave. Story 3. The thing about pushing yourself too hard on the road is that exhaustion doesn't hit you all at once. It creeps in, slowly, quietly, until suddenly you realize your eyes have been closed for half a second longer than they should be. That's where I was that night. Somewhere on a lonely stretch of highway cutting through Montana. The landscape was nothing but dark, rolling fields on either side, and my headlights barely cut through the inky blackness ahead. I had been driving for over 15 hours straight. No stops, no sleep, just caffeine and sheer willpower. The load I was hauling wasn't anything unusual, just some standard warehouse supplies. But I was on a tight deadline, and pulling over wasn't an option. I should have pulled over. It started with something small, a shadow, just at the edge of my high beams. It moved, quick, darting. My heart jumped, and I instinctively eased off the gas, thinking maybe a deer had run across the road. But nothing appeared, just the empty highway stretching ahead, vanishing into the night. I rubbed my eyes, willing myself to stay awake. I even reached for the small bottle of smelling salts I kept in the dash, cracking it open and taking a sharp inhale. The burn shot through my sinuses, jolting me back into full awareness. I was awake now, alert, focused. That's when I saw the clothes, scattered across the road, right in the center of my lane. A shoe, a jacket, a child's pink hoodie. I swerved instinctively, my tires screeching as I barely avoided the pile. My heart slammed against my ribs as I fought to regain control, my truck swaying dangerously before straightening out. And then I saw it. Further ahead, lying on the shoulder, was a body. I slammed the brakes. The truck groaned as it slowed, and my pulse pounded in my ears. The headlights illuminated a figure sprawled on the gravel, small, unmoving. A child. I swallowed hard, my breath coming fast and shallow. My brain screamed at me that something was wrong, that this didn't feel right. But my legs were already moving. I threw open the door and jumped down, my boots crunching against the gravel. The night was eerily silent. No wind, no crickets, nothing but the faint rumble of my idling engine. I approached carefully, flashlight gripped tight in my hands. The child was face down, motionless, barely illuminated by the glow of my headlights. "Hey." My voice came out hoarse, uncertain. No response. I took another step, and that's when I saw the blood. A dark, wet stain spreading across the child's hoodie, seeping into the dirt beneath them. My stomach twisted. I dropped to my knees, reaching out with a shaking hand to turn them over. And then the body moved. Not in a slow, pained way. Not like someone waking up. It jerked. Like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. I recoiled, my pulse hammering, scrambling backward as the child's body twisted unnaturally, their limbs bending in ways they shouldn't. And then, they laughed. Not a child's laugh. A deep, rasping, adult voice. The child snapped upright, their head tilting too far to one side, their mouth opening too wide. Their skin was wrong, too smooth, too pale, like something wearing a child's shape but not fitting into it properly. The laugh cut off abruptly. And then they spoke. You should have kept driving. The voice wasn't theirs. It wasn't human. My blood turned ice. And then, from the darkness beyond my headlights, something else laughed. Low, deep, everywhere. I turned, my flashlight cutting through the blackness. And then I saw them. Figures, standing just beyond the reach of my lights. Dozens of them. Watching. Waiting. Smiling. I ran. I didn't look back. I scrambled into my truck, my fingers fumbling over the door handle, slamming it shut just as something moved in the shadows behind me. I threw the truck into gear, my tires screeching as I tore away from the scene, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. I didn't slow down. Not for miles. But even then, even now, I know I didn't leave them behind. The road blurred as I sped away, the engine roaring beneath me, but my pulse was louder. My hands trembled on the wheel, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I kept expecting to see those figures in my mirror, to hear that inhuman laughter crawling through the cab, but the road behind me remained empty. Or at least, that's what it wanted me to think. I drove for miles, refusing to stop, refusing to let my mind dwell on what I had just seen. But something gnawed at me, a wrongness that refused to fade. That thing on the road, the one pretending to be a child. It spoke. It knew I was coming, and it wanted me to stop. But why? I reached for my CB radio, my fingers slick with sweat. Maybe another trucker had passed through that stretch earlier. Maybe they saw something. I clicked the button. Any drivers on the I-94 tonight? I need a status check near mile marker. I hesitated, trying to remember. Around 3:12. Anyone see anything strange back there? Silence. Then, static. The hairs on my arms stood on end. At first, I thought it was just the usual radio fuzz, but then something filtered through the noise. A voice. Low, distorted, and familiar. You should have kept driving. My stomach dropped. It was my own voice. I ripped my hand off the radio, my breathing sharp and uneven. My brain fought for logic, for some kind of explanation. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe exhaustion was warping my perception. Then, the truck lurched. A violent jolt jerked the cab sideways, nearly sending me into the ditch. I gripped the wheel, wrestling against the unseen force pulling at my truck. Something was wrong. The weight felt off. Like something was dragging behind me, slowing me down. With a deep, sinking dread, I flicked on my rearview camera. And my breath stopped. My trailer was open. The heavy steel doors, which had been locked, now swung wide, revealing nothing but darkness inside. No cargo. No equipment. Just an empty black void. A void that moved. A ripple, subtle but unmistakable, ran through the darkness in the trailer, like something inside was shifting. I slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded to a stop, tires screeching against the asphalt. My pulse pounded in my ears as I unbuckled my seatbelt, my mind screaming at me not to go outside. But I had to see. I grabbed my flashlight, throwing open the door and stepping into the cold night air. My boots crunched against the gravel as I moved toward the back of the truck, my every step hesitant, reluctant. The darkness inside the trailer was wrong. Not just an absence of light, a presence. The kind of darkness that feels like it's looking back at you. I swallowed hard and raised my flashlight. And then, something stepped out. I didn't see its face. I didn't see its shape. But I saw its shadow. Too tall. Too thin. Stretching impossibly long against the pavement. And I heard it. A whisper. Crawling through my mind. You brought me with you. The flashlight flickered. The air grew heavy. And then, the thing moved. I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I felt it behind me, too close, too fast. I dove into the cab, slamming the door shut, locking it with shaking hands. For a split second, I saw my mirror, saw my own reflection. But my eyes, they weren't mine. Something else was looking back, smiling. Then, the lights in my truck died, and everything went black. I don't remember what happened next. When I woke up, it was morning. My truck was parked neatly at a rest stop miles away from where I had been. My trailer was closed and locked. My cargo untouched. But I know I didn't drive there. And the worst part? When I checked my logs, the last entry was marked 3:12 a.m. Mile marker 312. Right where it all started. I don't know how I got out. But I know one thing for sure. I didn't leave alone.